no matter how crazy the world is, you got to carve out 10 to 20% of your time thinking about what's coming further down the horizon. So I absorb that, like literally. Like I need to treat these conversations as like everyone I'm interviewing and asking questions about, they're smarter than I am. They're thinking about the future. What are you thinking about that I should be thinking about? And that really became kind of like a core thesis of these conversations, and has actually led to pretty incredible business opportunities for me.
Today's guest is my friend Ken Biberaj, a former New York City Council candidate and chairman of the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce, real estate thought leader, and the energetic host behind Coffee with Ken, a conversation series that began in the early days of the pandemic and has grown into something far bigger than its original Zoom calls. Ken's path weaves much of what pulses behind Coffee with Ken, including the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, managing to stay upbeat, curious, and grounded through it all. What I find most compelling is his calm sense of urgency, whether it's daily campaign trips to the subway on the Upper West Side for a year straight, shaking hands in rain and snow, or building thoughtful, grounded, and agenda-free dialogue through his platform. Ken's core message has always been the same: stay consistent, stay human, and do the work even when no one's watching. That mindset, modeled after his father's 43 years at Voice of America, has shaped everything from his business success to his view of public trust. This conversation is about grit, humility, and finding purpose at the intersection of politics, business, and community. Let's start the show. Ken Biberaj, thanks for being on, man. I know we've been going back and forth for a while, and finally scheduling it. It's a thrill to have you on.
I mean, I'm just so excited by what you're doing, and it's been a blast doing Coffee with Ken, and I'm so excited about what you're up to, man.
Well, so I'm glad that you mentioned Coffee with Ken, because we're going to get there. That's a huge component of why I wanted to have this conversation, for the benefit of our own audiences, but certainly for my own personal benefit. But I also want to spend some time on your background. I'm looking to the side because I've got some notes here, but you have an illustrious career that is, so just for the benefit of the audience, we know each other, Ken and I, as colleagues at Savills. We've been brokers for many years and have known each other for several years. But
now we're podcast stars.
Now we do share that podcasting, and we've gotten to know each other a little bit better through that lens. But preceding real estate, you have a larger background than I think a lot of real estate related professionals do. And I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to talk about your real estate related pursuits, some of the new developments in what you're doing. I also want to spend a lot of time on Coffee with Ken, just for my own personal benefit. But real quick, for the benefit of the audience, you went to American University, you went to NYU Law School, New York Law School. And you got a master's of public policy from Harvard.
Yeah.
You also,
I love school, man. I love school.
You, well, those are no small feats. You were also chairman of the board for the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce, but you also ran for office, and that's where I want to kick things off. We'll talk about the Russian tea room as well. Maybe it's good to start off with the Russian tea room, because maybe that I think segues in.
Yeah, perfect. Well, look, first, again, thanks for having me on. Always great to spend time with colleagues, and then to actually share this kind of love of thought leadership and podcasting with you is great. But yeah, I mean, I had kind of really been focused on politics and education. So I went undergrad, straight to grad school, straight to campaigns. And I'll never forget it. My uncle called me after worked on a presidential campaign, and we lost. And he was like, you're going to get a real job now? And
what presidential campaign?
It was the Kerry campaign in 2004. So I went straight from American 2002, finished Kennedy School 2004, right to the campaign. And then it was kind of do you just jump on another campaign? And I got a little nervous about that. I had a lot of friends who had kind of just done the political thing, consulting thing, and so on. And I was very, very fortunate that I had an uncle in commercial real estate who said, hey, come to New York and learn business. And at the time, he had just bought the Russian Tea Room on 57th Street, an iconic restaurant in New York City, but it had been closed at the time. So I went to New York, and we worked on plans to what should we do with it? Do we reopen it? Do we build on the site, etc.? But it was that experience.
Did he own the building and the business?
Yeah, so he bought the real estate when the restaurant was closed. So we set out to kind of reopen this iconic institution. And I'll never forget, I was kind of in law school at night, working in real estate, but then also setting up plans to reopen this restaurant. And I had to go take a class at the Culinary Institute on how to open a restaurant, but I could never tell anybody who I was or what I was about to do, because it would be kind of ridiculous. And, we put together an amazing team and reopened it, and it's still in operation and existence, survived COVID, and, it's over 90 years old right there on 57th Street.
That's a
iconic.
staple of New York. I remember being
Yeah.
12 years old, going to visit, and that was one of the first stops that
Yeah.
my parents mandated.
Yeah, it's a truly special place. And it was opportunity to kind of see what it's like to run a restaurant, which is a very challenging, difficult thing. And then also kind of manage real estate, see that in action, and also the types of high profile people that would come through the tea room. So it was a real privilege to kind of have that opportunity to kind of, have a front row seat of reopening something so iconic.
Any takeaways from the restaurant business that you still hold with you?
Yeah, it really is hospitality, right? Like the restaurant business is about service. And I think the more you kind of don't look down on, what it's like to run a restaurant, work in a restaurant and service industry, when you take a step back and you realize that at the kind of macro level, you are there to kind of make people's lives in that moment a little bit better, help them forget about their day, have a good time, right? Like they're giving you time, not only money for the food that they're, purchasing at your restaurant, but they're giving you their time. They want an experience. So it's you have a captive audience. I think when you appreciate the magnitude of like the privilege of people dining with you, it puts it into perspective that you're in the service industry. You want to live up to their expectations and make sure they come back, right? And it's something that translates into any line of work in any business and is just a real kind of macro thread on relationship building, really. So.
Well, that's the front of the business. How about the back of the business? Do you have any from permits and plans to actually financing it, operating it, staffing it? Any takeaways from that you still?
Yeah, you alluded to the kind of running for office thing, and I ran for office and I kind of used the tea room as a bit of a example in a lot of cases of just like how difficult it was to interact with government, right? I mean, like we would have an issue at the tea room and be like, okay, well, we need a permit from the fire department. You'd go down there. They're like, no, you got to go to building department. You'd go there and be like, no, you got to go over here to this other agency. And it was like this runaround to the point where you had to hire an expediter to help you actually get something done. And this always resonated with me. The fact that like businesses and Americans would have to hire an expediter to interact with your own government is a shortcoming and fault of the system that needs to be addressed. And that was one of the reasons that I kind of ran for office was, we were the Russian tea room. We were large. We were iconic. We could, afford it and we could do it. If you're running a small business or you have a lot of locations, like it's a true challenge. And, New York was a community of immigrants who tend to just create their own restaurants, right? Like, and those hurdles are kind of arduous. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can only imagine what year was that reopening?
Yes, we reopened it in 2006. And then I ended up running for city council in 2013.
So what took place between 2006 to 2013?
So I went to law school at night. So I graduated in 2008. I was never going to actually go practice law. It was one of these things where it's an invaluable degree to have. And at the kind of encouragement of my uncle, he kind of gave me the flexibility to take a law school at night, basically. So I actually took the max classes permissible during the year and over the summer and worked during the day. And we did real estate and the restaurant, right? So we had a portfolio of properties that my uncle owned and occupied in Manhattan and the Bronx. So I got to see a breadth of real estate that most people don't get to see. So not only, Marcus, were we leasing and selling and purchasing buildings in Manhattan, we were doing that with, vacant land and lots in the Bronx, and then also running an iconic restaurant in Midtown Manhattan. So my kind of breadth of like what I spent my days on was pretty extensive. Graduated law school 2008, got married in 2009, had our first child in 2013 as I was running for office. So our firstborn Hudson got a front row seat to meeting people on the Upper West Side.
I want to talk about you running for office, but I don't want to skip over your master's in public policy.
Yeah.
Was that still in the hopes? Did you go into master's of public policy preceding law school?
Correct. So I went right from college. Okay. So I graduated American. The average age of someone in the master's program at the Kennedy School was probably 28. So I was 22. So I went in and I thought I was a hot shot, and then quickly learned, most of my classmates had liberated small countries or served in the military, and I had done student government and worked on the Hill. So it was a quick kind of opportunity to kind of absorb the magnitude of the people from such a cross section of the country and internationally, and a large mid-career population of folks who were a decade or two in their own careers. So it was this opportunity where you learn a ton in the classroom, but having the opportunity to go to a place like that is really about the people you interact with. It's all about your classmates and so on. So I did that from 2002 to 2004. So it was a pretty wild experience. Less political than I thought, though, right? I came from American University. I was like, oh, Harvard Kennedy School was going to be the most political place on the planet. It was not. It was really filled with folks who wanted to go work at USAID, work in government, work at the UN, right? And I mean, incredible folks who had a commitment to public service, something that's a big challenge today as you look around what's happening in DC and beyond.
Well, I've always thought of politics, unfortunately gets, lightning rodded now, but it is the precursor to politics is philosophy, because it's really searching for the intersection of business, practical life, optimizing happiness, functionality, production, national security. I mean, among others, you know more than I do. So I'm just curious, how did that education inform, your perspective of the government, how you can be involved, and how did that contribute to your desire to run for office?
And we'll get to it a little bit later, but I really credit my time at the Kennedy School as kind of being the launchpad for what became our Coffee with Ken series, right? Because what I learned at the Kennedy School was really like any large problem society faces requires kind of trisector partnership. And that means you have to have buy-in from the public sector, nonprofits, education, and the private sector. And it's only at that moment where all three are rowing in the same direction can you actually effectuate large-scale change and impact. And that part of the Venn diagram is where I always wanted to kind of play and thought I could add the most value because I had an appreciation of the public sector. I went on to kind of have opportunities in business, but always kind of spend time with nonprofits and advocacy groups. So I kind of realized that, the people who are making the advocacy call to action are going to need support from the private sector. And eventually that next domino to fall would hopefully be the public sector with the power and resources to really make impact on people's lives. So all of that were the ingredients that I have always kind of aspired to dabble in, if you will.
Well, a lot of that seems to be not only perspective, understanding different perspectives, but the ability to build consensus, which I would imagine has served you well in a number of different capacities.
Yeah, I mean, look, would I have been better off going to the Harvard Business School? Maybe, but I feel like the diplomacy, public speaking, communications, public leadership, organizing skills that I got at the Kennedy School, which was more public service oriented, have really been invaluable in the private sector for me in particular.
Yeah, so. I would imagine. Diplomatic would be among the first adjectives I'd use to describe you.
I appreciate that. Most people say caffeinated or,
Well, that's who we're going to get there. So tell me about your decision to run. At this point, when you ran, you were how old?
So I was 33 in New York City. And the New York City Council has 51 members from all 5 boroughs. And it was this moment in time where they had extended term limits. Bloomberg, if you recall, had actually gone on to serve his 3rd term as mayor of New York City. So everyone was basically term limited out. So it was the first time the seat on the Upper West Side, as with other seats, was going to be open. And I'll never forget, it was an 8-way Democratic primary. And I was the only one under 50 from business. And if I had run on the east side, only one other person was running, and I might have had a better chance. And it was somebody, a peer of mine, right? Like very fascinating dynamic. And it was one of these things where I thought Mike Bloomberg had actually done some incredible things in New York City, and that there was this momentum and trajectory on kind of innovation and tech. The Cornell Technion campus was kind of on the cusp. Hudson Yards was being built. So I was very emphatic about he wasn't perfect. There are things to improve, but we need to build on this. But it was a kind of, Bloomberg message in a de Blasio year. And I was the kind of Democrat talking business, which wasn't the case for most Democrats around New York City. So I got clobbered, but I had an amazing time doing it. I mean,
if you don't mind, I want to indulge a little bit on that process. So from start to completion, what was that timeline?
It was like a year and a half, right? So I got in the race in mid 2012, actually. And the primary was in the fall of 2013. So it was about a solid year and a half. And it was one of those things where, I knew I was coming from a name ID disadvantage. And it was a pretty progressive, forward-leaning neighborhood. So I felt like I had to just outwork folks. And I literally just spent every single morning at the subways. And it was one of these things where, Marcus, I think it made me a better broker in real estate, frankly, because in New York City, when you stand on the subway, most people aren't saying, hello and, how's your day and tell me about your platform. They're telling you to get the heck out of the way and why are you bothering me and slowing me down as I'm rushing to work. So it kind of forces you to smile and take it on the chin. And, it's always in those moments after you're there for months on end when somebody actually stops and they're like, all right, you've been here long enough. Tell me your story. And then you kind of get that little win, and it fuels you for like the next couple months to stay out there.
This is sort of the basis of what I'm really trying to dive in on this podcast on, which is that those are thousands and thousands upon thousands of conversations that you're having for a year and a half. I would imagine the first week you were bludgeoned and punched up, and that's a tough thing to continue to want to come back. That's not just, there's got to be a drive there. There's got to be a purpose behind what you're doing. Otherwise you bail out. What was that drive, and what have you taken away from that? How has that been able to, I would imagine that has to have served you in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. I tend to do well when there's like a time frame, right? So I kind of looked at myself and I said, okay, this is going to stink. Like being out there every single day is going to be rough. It's going to rain. It's going to snow. It's going to be cold. It's going to be hot. It's not going to be fun. But this primary is in this many days. And I kind of just reverse engineer. And I had that experience with the bar exam. Like the bar exam is going to suck, but it's on this day. I have to do this much work and this many reviews and tests and, whatever, and then it'll be over. So I kind of reverse engineered to kind of manage the magnitude of it, because it could just seem daunting and that it'll never end, right? So I did that, and it is just like this recognition that I always thought if you just worked harder than other people, that's the differentiator, right? Like there's incredibly smart people out there, right? But if you're willing to kind of stay out there in the rain and the snow and work a little bit harder, you may not win at the end, but like you're not going to lose, right? Like,
life is truly
there's winning and losing, and sometimes you win when you lose, and
sure.
You just put it out there and you do your best, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But
what did that experience tell you about humanity or educate you about?
It showed for me, number one, like people will respect the work and the time you put in it. So people who would ignore me for months on end, eventually toward the end, like whether they voted for me or not, I had earned their respect. They were just appreciative. I once had a woman tell me that she would not vote for me for city council, but she would vote for me for Congress. And I said, how come? And she said, well, like you're a very sophisticated, thoughtful. She would be making all these compliments. And city council, she was like, look, if my power goes out of my building, like I'm going to call my city council member. I don't think you want me to call you at night. And I kind of paused. And I was kind of like, man, maybe she's right. Like, maybe I don't want like the call if something happens in me. I don't know, right? But it was one of these things where it was like a backhanded compliment, if you will. But you kind of slowly can like earn people's trust and respect. And I think people do appreciate hard work. I mean, this is America. This is a country where we can kind of have a merit-based success. You can kind of, work hard, succeed, and get recognized. And it's one of these things in the campaign where, I met thousands of people, and I still to this day have those relationships, and it's invaluable. I mean, so like memories, experience. I've always believed in public service. I knew if I had not ever ran, like would it be hanging over me? Would I always wonder, like, man, I should have run, and I felt like this was a moment, like Bloomberg was leaving, I was going to be a kind of new wave of like business leaders who were looking to add to the conversation. So yeah.
You feel like you scratched that itch, or you think there's still any lingering there?
I think so, right? Like it is, I have 3 kids now, so it's a little harder to imagine putting in the time and effort, and politics and campaigning is very difficult. Governing is also hard, and being accountable to voters. But right now, I think between supporting candidates I care about, using Coffee with Ken as a platform to talk about issues I care about, that's kind of keeping me motivated. And, I got young kids, and, maybe later in life there'll be an opportunity. I feel like I did my career in reverse, Marcus, right? Like I ran for office super young. I like chaired a chamber of commerce super young, right? Like supposed to do that when you're 70. So now I feel like I got to focus on work and make some impact.
Well, that's what I want to transition to. So the chairing the Chamber of Commerce, how did that come about, and what was that experience like?
It's one of these anecdotes I tell young people all the time, right? Like you can pursue a goal and it may not work out, but sometimes it's about like, what's the outcome from that effort? And for me, I ran for office, and I was proud to be a kind of advocate for small businesses, restaurants, and entrepreneurship. And at that moment in time, not many people were talking like that. So I had built this amazing relationship with the leadership team at the Manhattan Chamber of Commerce. And there was this deep connectivity because we had just reopened the Russian Tea Room, an iconic Manhattan restaurant. So they kind of came to me while I was licking my wounds after, losing my election. And I think they appropriately recognized, hey, you probably want to find a way to stay visible. You were just neck deep in this conversation. It is kind of hard for you to just like walk away from it. We're looking to kind of freshen up our brand and shake things up. And we're not getting a lot of new members in tech, real estate, and hospitality. So it was really this kind of moment of like mutual benefit where I could have a platform and come in, leverage the brand of the Russian Tea Room and our work on the campaign and relationships with the de Blasio administration on behalf of the chamber. And it was kind of low risk for them because we were just going to bring new energy and contacts. And it really became this like unbelievable platform for me that I could never have imagined. And Marcus arguably was like, I think I got more accomplished on behalf of the community and issues I cared about than maybe I would have being in the council. Because we go in there and we created chairman conversation events. And we actually were able to get folks from the Obama administration to come to New York and do interviews. And it was just like me interviewing people on stage. So we had Valerie Jarrett when she was at the White House, Eric Holder talking about criminal justice reform, Jay Johnson from Homeland Security. We did events on paid family leave, on climate change, on issues I cared about that weren't traditional issues a Chamber of Commerce usually talked about. So I was able to kind of push the chamber out of its own comfort zone under the kind of theory of my job is to put you in front of policymakers. You know, Kirsten Gillibrand is working on a bill on paid family leave. She should come speak and talk about it. And if you have issues or topics you want to share, I have created this room for you to have that dialogue.
Yeah.
And for me, it was about putting business leaders and political people in the same room when it wasn't a fundraiser and no one's asking for anything, but just to like talk about big issues.
Well, I'm starting to see the genesis of Coffee with Ken here. To some degree. But, you know, what's interesting is I was going to ask, like, what's your relationship to their success? And I won't use the F word, but there's lessons learned, right? And you didn't win in your run for city council, but there were a lot of wins that came from that, which are still sort of paying dividends today. And I'm wondering what your relationship to taking on new endeavors and potentially facing the reality that that endeavor didn't accomplish what it set out to achieve.
Yeah, I think if you genuinely believe in what you're working on, like I genuinely believed I would be good in the city council. I thought I had a different voice, so I felt like I should put myself out there and run as hard as possible. If you genuinely are in that position and there's something you care a lot about, even if you lose, you did your best and you put yourself out there. And I think just experiences like that are worthwhile, right? Like we could talk about other things later in life. Like I did this like race last year and it was one of these things like you get older, like when do you actually physically push yourself on these things? And, you know, for me at that moment running for office, like that's like a hard thing to do to like spend a year, put work on hold and like stand outside and try to convince people to support you. So putting yourself out there and like diving in, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but you tried. So as long as you're kind of like mission aligned and focused, I think that positive things will come from it. And I also am a firm believer, like things happen for a reason, and me losing that is totally fine. And it was such a blessing to have had that privilege to run. And then it led to so many other things.
Sure.
So.
I would imagine that your callousness or thick skin has to develop quite a bit when you're in those positions, and the criticisms that you face in opposition is not, especially on the Upper West Side, I would imagine that is not insignificant.
Yeah, it is a real, you know, the Upper West Side is the highest voter turnout district in Manhattan, in New York City probably. So like running and losing there is almost like, you know, harder than like winning in some neighborhoods, right? Like, so it is a battle every single day. Like you can be out there and if you have an off date, somebody's going to show up and by coincidence, that's the day they're going to have like deep questions about the city budget or your plan for the parks department or how you're going to address crime issues or, you know, you have to be on all the time and you have to have a positive attitude all the time. And you have to be willing to take it with a smile all the time. And I remember being at an event once and I think this was, I didn't like crack, but it was like a hot summer day and we were in one of these forums and it was like 150 people and 100 degrees and someone yelled at me about like, oh, well, you're from real estate. How can we support you? You know, and like, and then I paused and I kind of like had this realization and I kind of noted that like every problem, in my opinion, is a real estate problem. And it was a mentality thing. And I got to say like, your subways are overcrowded. I said, you let Donald Trump build all these buildings on the West Side Highway and there's no more schools, there's no more grocery stores, right? Like you had elected officials who cut deals who weren't in a position to get the best deal for the community. And bike lanes, you know, affordable housing, like all these things are actually constraints on like available space. And I genuinely kind of pushed back on this woman and I kind of said like everything in your neighborhood that you care about from small businesses and on is a real estate problem. And it kind of like elicited like some boos, some hisses, but it was like, sometimes you just got to kind of give it straight too and, you know, not be shy about like being forthright about what you believe and why you think maybe things haven't worked out for that community because I genuinely felt like they hadn't actually fought hard enough for some, big deals that got done and impacted the community.
Well, to your point about having to believe in what you're doing, I had a former congressman on not too long ago, and we talked about the value of vanity and ego in this process, because you really do need to have a backbone. You have to have a faith in what you're standing for, even if it may be wrong. But beyond that, you have to have an optimism that you can actually, achieve these outcomes. Because in the face of bureaucracy and, I heard the phrase recently that, people are reasonable. Individuals are reasonable, but people are not, right? Masses become something else, and you can't have individual conversations one at a time with thousands of people. And I guess I'm wondering, in today's environment, do you have any perspective as it relates to getting back to, just more nuanced conversation that you have on Coffee with Ken, that are really looking at all the spokes to the hub to understand more than just the headline of an X post as a means of information?
Yeah, I think it's all coincided with this kind of instant news, 120 characters, like everything's so fast. And I move fast too, but it's kind of nice to just like pause and have a cup of coffee and like have a conversation with folks. And I think we're just moving at such a velocity. And unfortunately with the pandemic, like so many benefits of like Zoom and virtual stuff, but then so many drawbacks where it's just like, you're just moving so quick and you're not getting that true human connection by having real life interactions. And then you're almost like more accessible. So the expectations are different. So I think nothing beats the ability to kind of like stop, think, reflect, and meet with people. The vanity thing on the political stuff is always an interesting topic, where part of it I think is like, you're just kind of, for me, for example, like you just get rejected so much when you're campaigning. Then once somebody gives you like positive energy, you really want to please them. You want to kind of convince them that you're, and you think like you're going to convince every individual person, but like scales of success, like you can't scale the one-on-one conversation. So you have to find a way to create a brand and a message that goes beyond just like the individual conversations. And it's a very like, it's politics, but that resonates with business and product development and going to market and storytelling and all kinds of things. So, well,
on that note, I'll use this as a launch pad for you to start sharing a little bit about Coffee with Ken, appropriate as you're having your drink here. You had an interview with John Meacham, who I'm a huge fan of. I became a fan of him backwards through Bill Maher, of all people, and I started to read. I'm in the middle of I think it's his Thomas Jefferson. I think he wrote that, but he talks about the portrait test, which I found to be really interesting. I'm wondering, what's your take on that? And maybe if you can use that as a launch pad to tell us how you got into Coffee with Ken and what it is for those who are not familiar with it.
Yeah. So just high level, we started this like thought leadership series literally 5 years ago, like 2 weeks ago, right? Like it was March 25th, I think, of 2020. So like the pandemic had hit. We do office leasing markets, right? A lot of people weren't going to the office because there was a global pandemic. And I was coming off the heels of like, the Chamber of Commerce and chairman conversations, but I had just moved in 2017 to Northern Virginia. So I was still trying to get my footing and meet people. And then the pandemic kind of clipped me probably more than other people. So I was in this moment of like, well, how do you stay visible and relevant? And I'm also like, a person who loves interacting with other people and personal connectivity. So I said, well, you know what? I have a weird network. I have weird people who follow me. I have weird access to folks because of the chamber and all these other things and running for office. So I'm just going to like have conversations with people, and I'm going to treat it like a webinar. And if anybody wants to watch, they can watch. And then we did like 3, and it was like hundreds of people would just tune in and like fill in the chat and all this stuff. So it was one of those things where we started it early and we just like haven't stopped. And what started as a truly just virtual, exercise and effort has now evolved into a lot of in-person events. So you referenced the John Meacham thing. That was like an event I could never have conceived of, right? We had partnered with CAA speakers that represents John Meacham. And we were in a position where we wanted to kind of raise, not that he needed his profile raised, but really introduce him to a broader audience of folks. So with CAA's partnership, we convinced the White House Historical Society to host us. And we interviewed him in the Decatur House, which is this iconic, hundreds-year-old carriage house on the White House grounds. And it was like this perfect venue for like 150 people to come together and hear John talk about like the books he's written about George H.W. Bush, to meetings and writing speeches for Joe Biden. It was at this moment in time where he was actually like spending time working with President Biden. So it was like he was at the White House and then he was having coffee with Ken in front of people. And he talks about just a host of different, ideas, but references this portrait test of just like presidents looking at that portrait and like, what are people going to think of me when I'm, long gone? And that like kind of elevated reflectiveness that he has come to appreciate when he's kind of writing his books and he's studying history, whether it's Thomas Jefferson or anybody else, just like deep stuff. And he's just like such a magical storyteller that for me, I read like 5 of his books. I was so nervous, watched videos and podcasts with him, but it was a really neat setting, but a lot different than just being virtual, right? I mean, you're reacting to an audience, you have people there. You're sweating, but
you did great, man. I am interested in. So I love this trajectory of sort of evolving, right? I mean, what it has become, because the majority of your discussions are live now, if not all of them. Your opportunities have opened up considerably, and I do, if you're willing to talk a little bit about how that's influenced your business pursuits and activities. But I'm wondering if you could just spend a second, just for my own personal benefit, what comment would you have about what your thought was originally, what kept Coffee with Ken was? Was it just scratching your itch? I think, from the outside, some people might have looked at it and said, what the heck does this have to do with real estate, right? Yeah. Like, what is he doing? This is just a passion project of his. But there is a lot of overlap between the 3 different sectors that you refer to, between the public, private, and nonprofit communities, that I think that juncture is really critical for everyone who is interested in their own well-being, certainly those within the business community. So I guess long question, but how has that inception taken shape since it came up, since you came up with it, and what it's become now?
Yeah, I think at the beginning, for me, it was used as a way to stay visible, where I was never selling anything. Like, I've actually never really done one on real estate. Like, I actually intentionally avoid the topic so that I'll never run out of stuff to talk about, because you can literally talk about anything. So I do talks on whatever I want, right? And it goes back to kind of the city council run. Like, if you genuinely believe in trying something and you just throw yourself into it, do that, and you don't know what'll come from it. So for me, I actually wasn't, and we've talked a little bit about this, like I was never tracking how many views, how many clicks, like any of that. I was always just more interested in like, hey, Marcus, you want to do a Zoom and like catch up, and I'm going to open source it and people could watch. And then people kept saying yes. And I think it was like timing and momentum, and that nobody was doing virtual events yet. So we kind of built this momentum. And that summer, I interviewed somebody named Beth Comstock, who's a former vice chair of GE. And she has a great book called Imagine It Forward. And her philosophy doing change management and stuff at GE was like, no matter how crazy the world is, you got to carve out 10 to 20% of your time thinking about what's coming further down the horizon. So I absorbed that, like literally. Like, I need to treat these conversations as like everyone I'm interviewing and asking questions about, they're smarter than I am. They're thinking about the future. What are you thinking about that I should be thinking about? And that really became kind of like a core thesis of these conversations, and has actually led to pretty incredible business opportunities for me, because I kind of went without an agenda. I was genuinely curious. It fed this kind of, need for me to kind of like feel like I was in politics, because I was talking to people in elective office or in business about what was happening in the world. So you feel like you're part of the conversation. And then I got to somebody named Jigar Shah. And Jigar Shah was the former head of the loan program office at the Department of Energy. And I think I was telling you this in a previous conversation. I had been doing a lot of industrial real estate during the pandemic and got really kind of focused on manufacturing. And I was like, wow, it really feels like there's more people building in the United States, even though we haven't done that in the last 30 years. But now there's some reshoring because of COVID and supply chain resiliency. But also the people who used to build apps are now building products. Like, something seems to be happening. And when I interviewed Jigar, he noted that the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bill, CHIPS, was going to fuel investment in more manufacturing. And I had kind of had this policy dilemma, Marcus, that I was dealing with, where the vacancy rate for industrial real estate nationally was like 2 to 4% in the early part of the pandemic. And I was kind of like, this is really hard. Like, we have like a public policy challenge where we don't even have enough industrial space to meet demand. So I asked him, like, well, where are people supposed to build this? He's like, well, you should help them find out where to build it. And I said, I should help them figure. And it was one of these like aha moments where I was kind of like, well, actually, let me think about that a little bit more. And it was a real realization, like Savills is a global commercial real estate firm with incredibly sophisticated people. So I grabbed some colleagues from around the country and started stress testing this idea. And for the last 18, 24 months, I have literally been crisscrossing the country working on advanced manufacturing projects, helping companies figure out where in the country they should build, helping them compete states against each other for projects, and then helping them structure the real estate deal. Should they lease? Should they own? So for me, Marcus, this moment in time is like the intellectual kind of beast is being fed by these companies that are transforming the world through clean tech, defense, national security. I get to deal with state economic development leaders. It's like my dream. I thought I was going to be a state economic development leader, right? So I'm dealing with this crowd of people who is striving to win these projects to make their communities better. And then we get to do real estate, which is our day job. And they're projects of significance where it kind of like gets you out of bed in the morning where you're like, I can go maybe help out that community in North Carolina or in Illinois or in Arizona. And now the inverse is happening, Marcus, where we're spending time and I'm speaking at these economic development conferences and like getting to know those communities even more so that we're ready for the next project and what story to tell. So all of it's been a bit of a flywheel.
That's the flywheel that I want to actually talk a little bit about because, you wouldn't be, you're doing it sort of backwards, right? I mean, you're getting in front of a company.
I do everything backwards, man.
Which is the best way sort of to do it, right? You're not necessarily having to pursue all of these companies, but by being a thought leader in a position where you're being sought out to speak. And I understand you're going to be teaching a class at MIT this upcoming week, which is sort of crazy to think, but it doesn't take
crazy for me to think,
a whole lot of, you can get a lot of reps in a short amount of time that can really make you an expert when you parlay it with preceding foundational pieces of information. But you might argue that you'd never have access to any of this if you hadn't lost your run for city council. I mean, it was, all of this sort of lent itself to a tripping forward that's provided a lot of opportunity for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to put it, right? It was this kind of opportunity with the chamber where I was never selling anything, right? Like I wasn't at Savills when we did the Manhattan Chamber. We were doing the Russian tea room and my uncle's stuff. So like I was building these genuine relationships with like big companies, CEOs, executives, and just trying to be helpful to them, putting them in the room with folks. And they all appreciated it, right? So I built all this goodwill with them that today now they're all my friends and they all know what we do and they want to reciprocate and tap us for our help on their projects. And then it led to kind of the conversations, and then that kind of was the impetus to Coffee with Ken, and then this kind of business platform at Savills where we don't need to be in a set market, Marcus, right? Like we're pitching people in California, overseas, et cetera, and developing teams around each engagement. So I think for me, just recognizing that Savills is a platform, like it doesn't matter what's happening in just one market. We can service all kinds of needs from companies around the world who are thinking about expanding to the United States and beyond. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. So I know we're starting to come up on time. I couldn't, I would be remiss if I didn't spend a couple of minutes. Well, actually, before I get to that, because I want to talk about your dad and I want to talk about you as a dad and sort of the relationship between those two things. But real quick, I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about Coffee with Ken, because I said, sort of tripping forward. And that's an unfair assessment because as someone who's witnessed the background of what's entailed and actually putting this on, in some ways, I sort of think back to the early days of the pandemic when you started having these webinars. I find that it's probably a little bit less threatening now than asking somebody to come on a podcast, right? Because a podcast somehow has become this little bit of a loaded term. But, I'm curious how it's effort to try and get guests. It's effort to combine the scheduling of their schedule and your schedule to get it to production and get it out and get it marketed. I'm just curious. First of all, how has the process of getting guests changed from the beginning till now?
So we're trying to get a little bit more organized and professional. So now we release videos like every 2 weeks as opposed to like once a month, every whatever. We had a good cadence, but there was never like a set thing. So now it's like trying to get more organized, YouTube channel, podcast channel, more in-persons. We film them. They're not live anymore, and we just drop them every couple of weeks. So that has helped kind of stay more organized. I have a whole running list of topics I care about and guests I want to interview. But it is a wild situation where we have like PR companies pitching us to interview people on a regular basis. And it's been like this thing I could have imagined, Mark, is that like I was like strong arming people to like join my webinar thought leadership series because I didn't even know if it was a podcast back then. I don't even know what it was. And now all of a sudden we have like PR people and we've been speaking at conferences, right? Like, so I got to go to the Social Innovation Summit in Chicago last summer and I interviewed the governor of Illinois on the main stage with 1,000 people, right? So we're getting more inbound. And again, because we're not like solely focused on conversations on real estate, it opens up the breadth of what you could talk about. So it's a ton of work. It is, to the point of the city council, like hard to maintain that stamina because, as I mentioned earlier, it's good when you have a date and you can kind of work toward it. There's no date with coffee. We're just like still doing it. So I'm trying to continue to like rationalize how to like, keep it going. But so far so good. And the problem is, it's just like when you meet a voter on the West Side and they actually give you the time of day, it fuels you to do the next one. Every time we do one of these conversations, someone tunes in, someone reaches out who I haven't talked to in a long time, someone comes to an in-person event, a business lead comes in, a new topic idea comes in. It's just one of these things where it's now become so routine for me that I can't not do it. And now we have like lists of people who want to come in person and watch. And
that makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. And the in-person thing is a fascinating thing though, because it's intimidating to try to get people to show up in real life, right? It's one thing for me just to do like Zooms, but now I've been like blown away because we get a cross section of people. Like they're not real estate events. They're not like Harvard alumni events. They're not right because of the cross section. The feedback I've gotten from folks is they really enjoy coming because they meet people from so many different industries. And it's like a rare moment where it's like a curated audience of people who actually care about making a difference, but they could be from nonprofits, public sector, private sector, campaigns, whatever. So
yeah, it seems like a more organic way to network. How's your preparation changed? That'll be my last question for in-person versus.
Yeah. You have to really have the questions organized and ready to go. Cause like I always have like a piece of paper or something in front of me. And when you're sitting there and hundreds of people are watching, you want to kind of be a little more organic, so I still have like a note sheet, but you try not to, rely on it. So you really got to like prep and be organized and just have it out. Yeah.
So I want to spend a minute. You made a post recently about your dad, and I want you to take a minute actually just to share with the audience what his role was and what that post was about, and then I've got a couple of questions.
Sure. So I grew up in Northern Virginia because my dad's been a lifelong civil servant for 43 years, and he has been a Voice of America, which has been in the news lately because the current administration decided they were going to just shut down Voice of America, and it's one of these like shocking realizations for me as someone who grew up every day watching my father go to work, be in public service. And for us, we're ethnically Albanian. And for a long time, he ran the Albanian service. So Mark, I grew up with people coming to me, telling me that they had listened to my dad's voice on the radio in the 80s and 90s while Albania was still communist. So I'd be on the Upper West Side campaigning, and like a building super or a restaurant owner who was Albanian saw me, and they would come just to say thanks to me and the family for what my father had done. So I grew up with this like deep appreciation of the positive impact government can make, not only for people here, but around the world. And it's been this terrible thing to watch how it's been dismantled and kind of, pushed off to the side. But for me, my father always inspired me to public service, right? Is why I went to American University, why I wanted to go to the Kennedy School, why I wanted to run for office. It was this kind of like path of public service that I really ingrained in myself from him and his leadership. And Voice of America is a journalistic entity, right? It is the U.S. government's broadcasting arm on news to countries that don't get fair news, right? Whether it's Russia or Albania or China, etc. So in a small way, we always joke that like, I guess I'm like journalistic now, Marcus, right? I interview people. So we're kind of like this extension of like, I never really appreciated it till recently, but like, he did it on such a scale. But what we're doing is having conversations and trying to share, these stories on topics that are important for the day. So.
Well, if I might be wrong, but Voice of America, the teams are relatively small, right? I mean, it's a news organization that is producing content, but it doesn't have the staffing that a large media organization.
No, it's incredible, like how ahead of the curve they were, even like in the late 90s when he was doing, going from radio to TV to social media to digital, right? Like they have country specific services that are broadcasting in, and they do it with a tight budget and a tight ship, right? Like I can't imagine any real monetary impact in a material way to the United States government by shutting it down versus the negative impact it plays on a geopolitical global scale of taking away the American voice to folks that were actually relying on having some type of democratic news to their country.
What do you think his work ethic and those principles have taught you?
I grew up watching, like, when he was broadcasting in Albania. I'll never forget the story, and it probably is a little bit of what I internalized in running for office. They would broadcast every day, Marcus, and they wouldn't even know if anybody was listening, right? And it was one of these things where, like, he would get up and he took it serious every single day, and they would do the news. And then it turned out that, like, everyone was listening to it and everyone was watching it. But it was one of those things where you go through the mechanics of, like, I know what my job is and I'm going to do it. And I actually don't even know if people are listening. And it's kind of like this, right? Like, you don't know how many people watch or listen to your podcast, right? But, like, you just got to keep doing it, even if it's only a few people, because it'll just continue to build upon itself. And that's what happened with him. And I kind of have always appreciated that work ethic. And I guess that's part of how I approach things in such a methodical, neurotic way, I guess.
Yeah. Well, on that flywheel momentum note, what do you think is among the more important principles you try and convey to your own children? You know, takeaways.
Yeah, I think the same lessons I learned from my dad, really just like consistency, right? Like showing up. You know, people will rely on what you tell them, right? So it's like those types of habits you want to get good at, right? Like on a daily basis, like do your work, show up, do right by people, be reliable, and just be consistent. And I mean, it's a message for like my kids. It's a message for like young professionals in our business, right? Because life's a marathon and it takes endurance. And the only way you're actually going to do it without burning out is to make incremental steps every day. But that means every day you got to actually get off your butt and do stuff. So,
well, I tend to ask this question, which I think you may have already answered, which is how do you measure success?
So for me, I always had like different answers to that. And I think more recently, as we're getting older, like for me, success is like freedom of schedule, right? Like the ability to like make it to my kid's baseball game, take my son to wherever he wants to go. We're going to see Dude Perfect in Pittsburgh this summer. It's like, of course we're going to go do that. So I think it's being able to have that flexibility. I have a big family. My parents are still in the same house in Virginia we grew up in, 20 miles away. My brother's in the neighborhood with his 4 kids, right? Like nothing beats having the flexibility of your schedule to be with your family and pursue what you want. So, yeah.
Any closing thoughts? Or anything?
No, I'm so proud of you. I'm so excited you're doing this. I'm so grateful. I'm not used to being on this side, right?
Yeah.
So I'm very uncomfortable, but it's
well, you did great, like you always do, man. I appreciate your support, and thank you so much for being on.
Well, I appreciate it. Good to see you, and
Likewise.
Looking forward to continue the conversation, man.
Likewise. Thanks for listening. For a detailed list of episodes and show notes, visit scalesofsuccesspodcast.com. If you found this conversation engaging, consider signing up for our newsletter, where we go even deeper on a weekly basis, sharing exclusive insights and actionable strategies that can help you in your own journey. We'd also appreciate if you subscribed, rated, or shared today's episode. It helps us to attract more illuminating guests, adding to the list of enlightening conversations we've had with New York Times bestsellers, producers, founders, CEOs, congressmen, and other independent thinkers who are challenging the status quo. You can also follow us for updates, extra content, and more insights from our guests. We hope to have you back again next week for another episode of Scales of Success. Scales of Success is an Edge West Capital production.